will start taking place fairly quickly. I think that we're in a very good position in terms of the meeting we just had over at the Capitol with the Republican senators. It was outstanding. I think we have tremendous support. I was just informed by Mitch that we had a unanimous vote from the Republican side, at least. We had a unanimous vote on the tax bill, and it goes now the next step, and I think we're going to get it passed. I think it's going to pass, and it's going to be very popular. It's going to have lots of adjustments before it ends, but the end result would be a very, very massive, the largest in the history of our country, tax cut, and lots of good things are going to happen, including the bringing back to our country of, it probably will end up being over $4 trillion money offshore that's stagnant, that companies and they're just not able to bring it back. So I think it's going to be a number over $4 trillion. Corporate will be able to compete now against the world. If you look at China, if you look at so many other countries, you look at many of the countries, China's at 15%. They're lower than us. We're getting it down to a level that is either going to be lower or right in the ballpark so that we can compete much better with our companies, our great, great companies. And that means jobs, and it means lots of other things. I'm very happy to see that the consumer confidence level is just about the highest it's ever been. In fact, I don't want to make any mistakes in front of the press because you'll get me on it, but to the best of my knowledge, it's the highest it's ever been. Consumer confidence has been setting records. They have confidence in the people leading their country. And I will say that I think it's going to go better and better, and I do believe that this vote on taxes, which are really tax cuts and reform, is going to be very, very important. So we had a good day today. We had a phenomenal meeting with the Republican senators. We had, it was very special, that meeting. In many respects, I wish you could have been inside that room. It was very, very special. The camaraderie. It was somewhat of a love fest. They want to see it happen. They want to see it happen, not only for the Republican Party. I think much more importantly, they want to see it happen for the country, because they know how important it is for us to compete and win. And with that, maybe we'll start with Paul Ryan to say a few words about where we stand with different things, and then I'll ask Mitch McConnell.
Okay. I'll just briefly say I think it's regrettable that our Democratic colleagues in the leadership chose not to join us today. For a bill to become a law, Congress has to pass a bill, and the President signs a bill. That means Congress and the White House always negotiate legislation. We have important work to do. We have big deadlines to meet. We have a military in need of our support, and that work needs to happen now. And I just think it's very regrettable that our Democratic colleagues in leadership chose to not participate, because we have to negotiate these bills to get this work done for the people we represent, and especially to help our military with these difficult situations we have. And I just hope that our friends in leadership on the other side of the aisle will choose to participate so we can get people's work done.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I would just add, I've been in this position under a couple of previous presidents. I can't recall ever turning down an opportunity to go down to the White House. As the Speaker mentioned, only one person in America can sign a bill into law, and that's the President of the United States. You cannot negotiate the year-end, the omnibus spending bill without the person who signs the bill in the room. So I think the Democratic leaders in the House and Senate need to understand the way the government works. And the administration has to be a part of the ultimate negotiation over what the spending level is going to be for the next year.
Well, we are very far apart because our views on crime and our views on immigration and the military, so many are different. But a lot of things have happened even over the last 2 hours with respect to the missile launch. We want our military funded, and we want it funded now. It's going to be bigger, better, stronger, it already is, than ever before. But we want to get going on that now. So that is a difference, in all fairness, from this morning when I told them that we're way, way far away. And with that, I may just have General Mattis say just a couple of words about what he has found out. General, do you want to say just a couple of little pieces of information for the media.
President, Senator, Speaker, a little over 2.5 hours ago, North Korea launched an intercontinental ballistic missile. It went higher, frankly, than any previous shot they've taken. It's a research and development effort on their part to continue building ballistic missiles that could threaten everywhere in the world, basically. And in response, the South Koreans have fired some pinpoint missiles out into the water to make certain North Korea understands that they could be taken under fire by our ally. But the bottom line is it's a continued effort to build a threat, sir, a ballistic missile threat that endangers world peace, regional peace, and certainly the United States.
Thank you, General, and we will take care of that situation. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. President, can you change anything your basic approach to North Korea, these missile launches today? Does it change anything about your basic approach to dealing with it?
Nothing changed. Nothing changed. We have a very serious approach, and nothing changed. We take it very seriously.
Do you believe there will be a documentary Mr. President? Would you blame Democrats if that happens?
If that happens, I would absolutely blame the Democrats. If it happens, it's going to be over illegals pouring into the country, crime pouring into the country, no border wall, which everybody wants. I got elected partially because of a border wall. You look at the military, we want strong funding for the military. They don't. So many things. As an example, they want high taxes. We want cut taxes. We're going to cut taxes. We're going to reform. We're going to simplify. They want high taxes. We want low taxes. So there's a lot of big differences. So we'll see what happens as to shut down. We'll see. But right now, things have changed over the last 2 hours because 2 hours ago a missile was launched. I think that will have a huge effect on Schumer and Pelosi. I think. We'll see. We're going to learn very soon. They should be calling immediately and say, we want to see you, but probably they won't because nothing to them is important other than raising taxes. That's the only thing they like doing is raising taxes. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Are the North Koreans thumbing their nose at you after your...
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
All right, you always wait till the last possible second to see if the president had anything more to say. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto. You're watching Your World, of course, on a very, very busy news day. This delayed commentary coming from the President of the United States speaking in the Roosevelt Room. Defense Secretary Mattis, among others, there. You might have noticed the two empty chairs for Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who canceled out on a meeting with the president and Republican leaders because of some tweets that zinged them earlier today. We'll get into that a little bit later, but also to let you know that this North Korean development, the first missile test in the better part of 2 months, was higher and further than any missiles have ever come from that country, just off the Japanese coast, obviously proving a technology that could land missiles within the continental United States, pretty much anywhere within the continental United States. And that, as Defense Secretary Mattis indicated, that is a worry here. But, of course, the other news domestic of the day was that Republicans, all 12 of them on the Budget Committee, voted in unison to advance the tax measure. The 11 Democrats on that committee did not. But among those who voted yes to get this out of committee was Senator Bob Corker and Senator Ron Johnson. Of course, they had been very concerned about this measure in the case of Senator Johnson about how it treats small and medium-sized businesses versus bigger businesses. We don't know what assurances he was given on this to propel this vote, or whether that would mean a yes vote in the General Senate when this comes up for a vote after what is going to be a blitzkrieg of back and forth debating, or what assurances were made to Bob Corker of Tennessee as to rein in the deficit and not have this thing blow through the math. So much to get into. Let's go to John Roberts at the White House with the very latest. Talk about a busy news day, John.
You know, I always expect the unexpected here at the White House, Neil, and also another general rule, do not cut away from the videotape until the camera's actually out of the room, because I've been halfway out of the Oval Office and thrown yet another question at the president, and we've gone back in to listen to him answer it. But one of the things the president said in the meeting that he had with the press and when he was there with the congressional leadership on the Republican side, some of his top advisors, was that he had a phenomenal meeting with the Senate Republican caucus today. It's called it a love fest. And I'm told by a White House source that while they don't have things totally nailed down in terms of a tax reform vote, they say it is, quote, looking good. Now, the fact that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi were not there was a function of a tweet that the president sent out this morning. We'll put that up on the screen for you so you can read along when the president said, quote, meeting with Chuck and Nancy today about keeping government open and working, talking about the looming budget battle. Problem is they want illegal immigrants flooding into our country unchecked, are weak on crime, and want to substantially raise taxes. I don't see a deal. The president really referring there to border security measures that he is looking for in exchange for a fix on the so-called Dreamers, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals folks who have been in this country for some time, were brought in when they were children by their parents who came across the border illegally. It looked earlier in the year as though they were going to have some sort of a deal between the White House and the Democrats, but now that deal appears to be fading. But after the president sent out that tweet, just as he was arriving on Capitol Hill to meet with the Senate Republican caucus, Chuck Schumer took to the Senate floor to say this. Listen here.
The president said, I don't see a deal, 3 hours before our meeting, before he heard anything we had to say. Given that the president doesn't see a deal between Democrats and the White House, Leader Pelosi and I believe the best path forward is to continue negotiating with our Republican counterparts in Congress instead.
And they say that they did that back in the spring with the omnibus spending bill, and they could do it again. But Republicans in Congress definitely want a budget on their own terms. They were very upset that the president cut this deal with Pelosi and Schumer a few weeks ago, Neil. So I think that they probably want to dig in their heels here. The White House also suggesting that this is merely political grandstanding on the part of Chuck Schumer. They're calling hypocrisy, pointing out that in the past he has not agreed with budget deals that had riders attached to them, pointing out that when he was on ABC's This Week back in 2013, when he was talking about the budget then and whether or not the Democrats would attach some sort of immigration provision to the budget bill, he said, quote, it would be sort of like somebody goes into your house, takes your wife and children hostage, and then says, let's negotiate over the price of your house. You know, we could do the same thing on immigration. We're not going to raise the debt ceiling until you pass immigration reform, but that would be, quote, governmental chaos. But what wasn't right for Chuck Schumer then appears to be right for him now. And, Neil, I couldn't tell you if it's the weather or a matter of timing or what, but things have certainly changed from the way they were 4 years ago. Neil?
Yeah, well, where you sit makes a big difference, right, John? Real quickly, Don, I mean, is it your understanding then that given this rapid vote we had in Washington with the Budget Committee, that the timetable still looks doable? They wanted to get this, obviously, into the debate, voted on this weekend at the latest. Is that really doable?
I mean, it's doable, but the pieces have to fall in line, and they have to fall in line without a whole lot of problems. So
right.
what has to happen is, I'm told, the president said to Ron Johnson, senator from Wisconsin on the Republican side, basically, vote for this bill. If you've got differences and your own concerns over this bill, take it up with your colleagues and work through those. The president wants this to happen. It would probably have to be voted on, if not by the end of this week, Saturday, early next week, because then it's got to go to the conference committee. It's got to be reported back out from the conference committee. Then it's got to go back to the House and the Senate. Don't forget, they are scheduled to go into winter recess on December the 15th. That could always slide, Neil, but the calendar is certainly not in favor of any kind of drawn-out process here in getting tax reform done.
All right, John Roberts, thank you very, very much. To Peter Doocy on Capitol Hill right now, where their protest while that Budget Committee meeting was going on. Normally, you don't hear that type of thing. These things are sort of perfunctory, if not even dull affairs. Anything but today, huh?
That's right, Neil. And even though some Republican senators have been saying that they wanted some big changes to this bill in the Budget Committee before they would back it so it could go to the full Senate, everybody ended up voting for it. So it is on its way to the Senate floor as soon as tomorrow, potentially. You just heard John allude to it. President Trump and some other Republicans were really leaning on Ron Johnson today, who had been threatening to hold up the bill in this committee. They said, if you have a problem, just fix it with an amendment once it gets to the floor. And it seems like that's what he's going to do. But Democrats are steaming mad right now about how much Republicans did in a hearing that only lasted a few minutes.
In less time than it takes to wash a car, the Republicans put the green light to $10 trillion worth of tax policy changes. I've been in public service a while. I have never seen anything like this.
Here's the problem for Republicans now. There are several senators with a range of issues. It's not just one thing leadership needs to correct. For example, the deficit and the debt impacts are bothersome to Senators McCain, Corker, Flake, and Langford. The impact on small business is what's bothering Ron Johnson and Steve Daines. And then the individual mandate repeal is thorny for Susan Collins and Jerry Moran. That's also something Lindsey Graham is concerned about, but he talked it over with President Trump today.
Yes, we met with Senator Collins, myself, and Alexander. I am very much supporting repealing the individual mandate, but when you do that, CBO says that you'll get a premium increase of about 10% for some people.
Graham is one of the Republican senators that protesters actually tried to block from coming into this committee room for the vote, but he did get in. Those protesters were really upset about the individual mandate repeal. They were screaming basically that they were going to die if this bill got through. There did appear to be at least a dozen arrests, people who were pulled out of here who refused to walk out. They were literally carried out, and then some others who were sitting down screaming on the floor. But as you can see, it's all calmed down for now. Neil.
For now. All right, Peter Doocy, thank you very, very much, my friend. All right, with us, the aforementioned Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. He voted yesterday to get out of committee. That does not necessarily mean he'd be an automatic yes vote when it comes before the General Senate after what is expected to be a pretty aggressive back and forth in debate. Senator, thank you for joining us. Good to have you.
Hello, Neil. How are you doing?
Good. Is that pretty much your thinking, sir? Let's fight this issue in the General Senate now, to take it up with your colleagues, get it out of committee so you could do that?
Well, first of all, there was some pretty good movement so far on both of my issues, and I'm one of those deficit hawks, and I've been very supportive with what Senator Corker and others have been working with the administration to try and, come up with some kind of trigger if we really don't have the revenue growth, which I believe we will have. I think what's going to probably propel us to success here is within the Republican conference, everybody agrees we need pro-growth tax reform, and so it's really just that legislative process. You're seeing the sausage making occur right now to make sure that we can have as good a package as possible. But no, I've still got very serious concern about those pass-through businesses, oftentimes the manufacturers that, so important to a small town that, really need to make sure that as we make all businesses competitive globally, we don't leave behind those pass-through businesses that, maintain their competitive position and balance within our economy.
So your argument was that they're treated at a disadvantage as some of their larger counterparts whose corporate rates will slide to 20%, theirs will not. What kind of overtures were your colleagues making to even that up a little bit?
Well, we're talking very seriously. Right now, the vast majority of pass-throughs will not be able to deduct state and local income taxes where C-Corps will. I don't see how that's politically sustainable. It's certainly not fair. It widens the disparity and puts those pass-through businesses at a competitive disadvantage. So we're talking about that. There's resistance. But, again, what the president told me is we need this this thing passed through committee, and we're going to fix your issue. I agree with you. We all recognize that this pass-through issue is an important one, and we're going to fix it. And when the President of the United States tells you he's going to fix your problem, and he asked for your vote, I was more than willing to give it to him in conference here today.
He's not on the committee, but your colleague from Montana, Steve Daines, was among those who shared your concern about the treatment of businesses. Do you know, or did you get a chance to pass along the measures being expressed with you to improve that situation?
Senator Daines and I are in pretty constant contact, and we are very unified in our position here that we certainly need to close that disparity that doubled basically under the Senate bill. So it's still a huge concern of ours, but again, I like the movement so far. I think Senator Corker was obviously satisfied as well. So the movement's in the right direction, and we absolutely need pro-growth tax reform. It's just table stakes.
All right, now you mentioned as well at the outset, because at first when I heard you were no vote, a couple of weeks ago, I thought it had to do with the deficit, because I know you're quite the deficit hawk. I didn't expect this no vote as a result of the treatment of businesses, but you are concerned about deficits. You are concerned about adding to the debt. By almost any measure, this will add to it over the course of the next decade. Are you that convinced that it will do the trick, and would you be open to this other idea expressed by a couple of your colleagues to build in tax increases if they don't measure up?
Well, again, that's the trigger. I'm concerned that if we do that, we have to target that properly so it's spread evenly so it doesn't do economic harm. But the best way of doing that is make sure we have a really strong pro-growth tax package. That's what I'm trying to work on. But you know, one of the issues with the disparity, the disparate treatment of pass-throughs is if we literally incentivize them to become C corps, that would be a huge drain on federal revenue. As all of a sudden, instead of paying a little over 30%, they're literally down paying an effective 18.5% because C corps can deduct. So that would be a huge drain. I've done the calculations. It could be hundreds of billions of dollars. So this is in addition to making sure that we maintain that competitiveness of these businesses that are so innovative. They create so many jobs. They're a real engine of our economy, that we don't incentivize them to become C corps and have a massive revenue loss to federal government.
Now, are we going to see this individual mandate thing in or out? I mean, Susan Collins of Maine was told it would be out of there. That would secure her vote. How do you feel about that?
Well, I hope we leave it in, because I know throughout the country and in Wisconsin, the individuals that are actually paying the penalty, over 80% make $50,000 or less. I mean, they can't afford Obamacare. Obamacare premiums have been artificially increased, so the people paying the price are low-income individuals. It's a real shame. It's the CBO, I think, is reevaluating the score as well, saying, whatever positive impact the individual mandate had in getting people sign up insurance has played out. So I want to certainly repeal the individual mandate, and I want to give those Americans some real relief from those penalties that they're paying right now.
How did the meeting go today, Senator? Where were you seated? Where were some of these senators who've had maybe an acrimonious relationship with the president, like Senators Flake and Corker you mentioned earlier? How did it go?
Well, listen, it's always very cordial. Every time I've been with President Trump, he's been very engaged, very gracious, quite honestly. So, he's actually quite funny. It's humorous at many times. So it's just a really good luncheon meeting. And obviously, he was pushing the tax bill, and he certainly brought a couple of us over the top that had some real reservations, at least for this committee vote. But again, also made that commitment. He'll continue to work with us. Senate leadership will continue to work with us. And so I got enough movement. I got enough assurances that we'll get this fixed, that I was able to vote yes.
Was John McCain there?
I didn't see John. I'm not quite sure.
With Senators Corker and Flake, did they exchange pleasantries with the president or any of that?
Oh, no. Senator Corker stood up. You'll have to talk to him in terms of what he said. But again, it's all, listen, this is, as I said, this is the legislative process. This is the sausage making. There's give and take. But I thought it was a very cordial luncheon all the way through.
When you look at the timetable for this, Senator, are you confident that this could be voted on? I mean, they're literally talking by this weekend.
That'll be up to leadership in terms of when we can actually engineer those votes. Right now, I just want to work with the White House, working with Senate leadership, and make sure that pass-throughs, we narrow that disparity so they don't en masse become C corps and hemorrhage that revenue, but also so they can stay competitive in our economy.
Senator, you've read polls as well as I, and it could be the eye of the beholder. I understand that a lot of Americans are frustrated with appear to be, to them at least, generous provisions and allowances for corporations. Not so much for them. Permanent tax cuts for those corporations, ones that phase out for them. So to those who are looking at this and seeing it as a boon to big companies, would you be disappointed if those companies simply plowed those savings back into buying more stock or into increasing their dividend, doing none of the things that a lot of you and your colleagues have hoped they would do and still do, and that is hire people?
Neil, that's one of the reasons I'm really fighting for the pass-through entities that have to compete globally, is also with those C corps. So no, I'm fighting hard to make sure that what we do spend in terms of the static score, we spend with a little more equity between pass-through businesses and C corps. I think it's a legitimate complaint right now about the Senate bill. It's one of the reasons I've been raising Cain about it. But again, hopefully my colleagues recognize that same problem. We can fix it.
All right. So right now, with allowances that might be made for smaller, medium-sized companies, pass-throughs, if all they could do, your colleagues could do, was allow them to, as big companies could and can, write off their state local taxes, would you be okay with that?
Well, I'd rather, create that equal treatment in terms of state and local taxes by denying that deduction to C corps, because it'll raise revenue to bring down the rates for the pass-throughs. But Neil, let me just say more broadly, it's a table stakes issue. American businesses are now uncompetitive, both pass-throughs and C corps. We have to bring down the corporate rate if we're going to compete globally. It will spur economic growth, which is what raises wages. So I'm completely supportive of what we're trying to do. C corps, I want to make sure we don't leave pass-through businesses behind. But that'd be the basic defense is we simply can't allow our business tax system to be so uncompetitive globally. It's just a table stakes issue.
All right, Senator, thank you very much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Have a great day.
All right, you too. Senator Ron Johnson, now to Texas Republican Congressman, Chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, Jeb Hensarling. Congressman, very good to have you. So much to get into about your reaction to what Ron Johnson was just saying. He voted to get this out of the Budget Committee and fight another day for the things that are important to him, like these treatment of smaller companies, pass-throughs, what have you. Are you optimistic this passes the Senate?
Oh, I'm very encouraged. And so, again, I was concerned when my friend Ron Johnson had made his announcement. I was hoping that he would see the better in the legislation, which clearly he did to further it, and it will continue to be refined, but I think this has a lot of momentum behind it. We got it out of the House. They now got it out of the Senate Finance Committee. It has a lot of steam behind it, and it's so important for this economy. I mean, as we know, under President Obama, we languished at about a 1.5% to 2% GDP economy, which means that paychecks lagged, savings remained decimated, American dreams were small and timid, and now we are on the precipice of a 3% plus economy for years and years to come if we can get this passed, and I think we'll get it done, Neil.
All right, now we talk about the revenues that the tax cuts could create. If they don't, one of the things the Senate is working on, sir, is this provision that would raise taxes in the event the revenue doesn't pan out. How would you feel about that?
I can't think of a worse way to tank the economy than to actually raise taxes. And so what we have, again, is not economic theory, but economic fact. You can look at the Reagan tax cuts, the Kennedy tax cuts. Frankly, you can go all the way back to the Coolidge tax cuts and find out that with pro-growth tax reform, you've actually created more
So a
tax
provision like
revenue.
that, you sound like you would not support.
Well, I always reserve the right to actually see what is being proposed, but conceptually, I think the idea that if you're having tough economic growth, beatings will continue until morale improves. Tax increases is probably not the way to go. But I believe, based upon history, that we can have a 3.5% GDP growth. I mean, in Reagan's tax reform package, I want to say that revenues were 19% greater when he left than when he came into office. The same thing is clearly possible under President Trump. And so I wouldn't want to support
you're right. The
a package.
revenues definitely come in. Both parties know how to spend it, that's for sure. But let me ask you, sir, while I have you here, Chairman, this move to get this through quickly, one idea bandied about was whatever the Senate comes up with, it's thrown back to you guys and you vote yay or nay on it. What do you think of that?
Well, I don't think that's really how our democracy is supposed to work, and I think that everybody in the House who's been elected by their constituency in their district needs to have their voice heard. And so if we remember our Civics 101, they come up with a bill, we come up with a bill, and we go to conference. I expect us to go to conference, and we've got matters to work out. But you know what, Neil? There's a whole lot more that is in common with these tax plans than there are that separates us. And so I feel quite confident we can come together with a great pro-growth tax plan that's going to mean greater economic growth, more jobs, bigger paychecks, and a very healthy economy.
While I have you here, Chairman, I know you got to go, but I am curious what you make of this Mick Mulvaney situation, the budget director who's running the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, because Leandra English, the acting director, thinks she's running it. So you have two bosses dictating policy to much of the financial industry, and no one knows who's on first here. Who is on first?
Well, Mick Mulvaney is on first, so number one. Even the own legal counsel, the legal counsel of the CFPB has said that Mick Mulvaney is the acting director. Second of all, the Justice Department has opined that Mick Mulvaney is the acting director. The only circuit court that has ever opined on the issue, the very liberal Ninth Circuit, has said in this case, once again, the president gets to name his person as acting director, thus Mick Mulvaney yet again. This is a last desperate gasp of the previous director who came in under a legal cloud. He will go out under a legal cloud. This is a waste of time. But the problem is not so much who's running the CFPB. The problem is the CFPB. It is the single most powerful, unaccountable agency in the history of the Republic. It tramples upon due process. It's an affront to separation of powers, and frankly, it's hurting consumers. Whether you look at free checking getting cut in half, fewer credit card offerings, many automobile loans costing $500 more. This is an agency that absolutely has to be reformed, and it needs to be reformed statutorily, and that's what we have done, at least in the House, through the Financial Choice Act. We would restructure it and make sure that it actually helps consumers by enforcing consumer law, not making it up and not running afoul and harming the greatest consumer protection we've ever known.
When it was being created, real quickly, it sounded like you didn't even want it created. Would you argue that it should be shut down?
Well, we have roughly 20 major consumer financial protection laws on the books. We can either have them enforced by, say, the Federal Trade Commission. They could be enforced by the prudential regulators of our financial institutions. Or, frankly, I do see there is merit in having a singular institution enforce them. But they are there to enforce the law, Neil, not make it up. They're making it up. They're arrogant. They're part of the swamp. They have to be drained.
All right, I'll put you down as a maybe on them. Chairman, it's a real pleasure having you. Thank you for taking the time.
Anytime, Neil.
All right, Jeff Hensarling of Texas, the House Financial Services Committee Chairman. All right, before we come back after break here, I want to show you something to show how crazy this day was for the markets. And this shows, even though we were up 255 points, midday word that North Korea had a missile test, and its biggest one yet in 2 months. And the markets all of a sudden took a big gain and started peeling about 80 points off it. Then later in the day, word that the Senate Budget Committee had voted, at least the Republicans on that committee, all 12 of them had voted unanimously to advance the bill to the full Senate. These markets are responding in real time to what is going on in the real world, scared about what North Korea is doing, not so much about what the Senate's doing. More after this. Remember Benghazi? Justice delayed, maybe not denied, but again, in the eye of the beholder. The mastermind behind that attack, the verdict is in. It's going to shock you. We're back in 60 seconds. Years after the fact, maybe some justice. A jury convicting Ahmed Abu Khatallah. He's been considered the mastermind behind the Benghazi attacks. Catherine Harridge with more on what went down today. Catherine.
Well, thank you, Neil. Within the last hour, a jury here in Washington, D.C. has found the Benghazi suspect guilty on only 3 of the 15 counts that were brought against him in connection to the 2012 terrorist attack that killed those 4 Americans, including Ambassador Chris Stevens. Abu Khatallah was brought to the United States in 2014, and he was described by the Obama administration as a central player, if not the mastermind, of the attack. But the jury disagreed. They did not find him guilty on the most serious charges of murder. They found him guilty of providing support, material support to a terrorist organization, in other words, participating in the attack, also destroying U.S. federal government property. In this case, that would be the compound as well as the CIA annex, and the discharging and the carrying of an automatic weapon. So this is a major setback for the government because he was portrayed as someone who was so central to the attack that killed those 4 Americans. There were really 2 big issues that the prosecution had to try and overcome. One is that they relied very heavily on a paid informant to track down Abu Khatallah. He was paid $7 million for that, and to also provide testimony. And the defense said that he clearly had a financial incentive to fabricate or sort of bolster the case against Khatallah. And really, secondly, it was a really hard case because the FBI was never able to secure the crime scene in Benghazi. They never secured the compound. Therefore, they were never able to rely on solid forensic evidence. They had to rely on the paid informant. And today, a Washington jury said it was simply not enough enough to convict him in the murder of those 4 Americans back in 2012. Final point, another Benghazi suspect has been brought to the Washington, D.C. area in the last few months, and the question now is whether this may in any way change the way in which that prosecution proceeds and whether the government decides to file an appeal on some of the charges in this case, Neil.
Just to be clear, he would not be facing the death penalty regardless.
That's correct. Yeah, the most serious charges, he was found not guilty. So the death of the 4 Americans, he was found guilty of lesser charges, so supporting the terrorist attack. But really, the jury found that he was a fringe player or a minor player. And in fact, the surveillance video from the compound showed that he arrived after the fact.
Thank you, Catherine, very much.
You're welcome.
Catherine Herridge. Meanwhile, North Korea, as you heard, and it whipsawed the world today. First time in a couple of months, a ballistic missile test, and this one was a doozy. Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. John, what did you think?
Well, I thought General Mattis's comment at the president's press availability was significant, that this missile was the highest that we had tracked a North Korean launch. And I think what that means is that they're increasing their ability, if you flatten that trajectory out, that the ballistic curve could well take it deep into the United States. We'll have to analyze it and see. But it underlines the basic point. In very short order, North Korea will have the capability of dropping thermonuclear warheads on any target it wants in the United States. And you can put all this happy talk about diplomacy with North Korea, waiting for China to do something, to the side, and the United States faces this critical decision. Will we live with a nuclear North Korea, or will we use military force? That's going to be the choice in very short order.
You think China was given a heads up on this?
I think that's hard to say. I think China knows a lot more about what goes on in North Korea than we do. I think they've continued to play us, frankly, even after the president's trip. The official line was, we think the United States and North Korea should negotiate some more. Sure, just like we've done for 25 years, to the same effect, 0. So absent really a dramatic move by China, agreeing to the reunification of the peninsula, overthrowing Kim, putting their own puppet general in charge. Time is running out here. And if you're content to be at the whim of the North Korean dictatorship, to threaten and extort the United States with nuclear weapons, then we can live with a nuclear North Korea. If you're against that, if you're worried they may sell North Korean technology to Iran, to ISIS, to other would-be nuclear powers, then we're going to have to look at military force. Nobody likes this option, but it's a question of what kind of terrorist regime you want to live under.
You know, you got to think, again, when it was Russia warning earlier this week of an apocalyptic scenario in the Korean peninsula. Do you think we're closer to that?
No, I don't. Look, I don't think this scenario is apocalyptic. What we're concerned about primarily is North Korean retaliation against South Korea. And what retaliation do they threaten? What retaliation does everybody assume? They will shell civilian areas of the capital of Seoul, which runs right up to the DMZ. That's the North Korean response, to commit an act of terrorism by killing innocent civilians. And that's what they're prepared to do before they get nuclear weapons. Imagine what they're capable of once they get deliverable nuclear weapons that can hit any target in the United States.
Scary stuff. Ambassador, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
John Bolton. All right, well, you've seen a lot of these over-the-top Time Magazine covers, right? Well, Time Magazine could have a new owner very, very soon, and it could change everything, maybe instantly, after this. You know, you remember this cover in Time Magazine depicting the White House?